Many men are concerned about how their faces look. So they're getting rhinoplasties, they're getting brow ridge surgeries, changing how their orbital bones look. But the really big one for this community and many men right now is leg lengthening surgery.
Welcome to Pop Syllabus. I'm your host, Christiana Mbakwe Medina. Look around you and you might start to notice young boys and men viewing, getting cosmetic surgeries, and even breaking their own cheekbones, all in the hopes of changing how they look. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Michael Halpin to talk about the looksmaxxing trend and how it's harming both men and women. Dr. Michael Halpin, you've said to me that I need to call you Mike, brilliant sociologist. Welcome to Pop Syllabus. I'm so excited to talk to you today about the Manosphere and looksmaxxing. But before we dive into that, you kind of focus on the relationship between social isolation and health and misogyny in online communities, and how the emerging social science of that is changing how we understand mental health. I'm curious, how did you get interested in just this field of study in general?
First, thanks very much for having me here. I'm very excited for the conversation. So big question. I'll try to give, a reasonable answer to it. The reason that I'm really interested in health and social isolation is that there's a tremendous amount of research in sociology and the social sciences that indicates that being isolated is one of the single worst things for your health that can possibly happen. And there's been an increase for many groups of people in social isolation. So the elderly are one group that gets talked about very frequently in research. Many people who are over 65 get kind of neglected or left on their own, and they deal with isolation, levels of isolation that we probably have trouble fathoming, like not speaking to another person for a month, for instance, outside of service encounters. And then there's also, at the same time, I think there's a lot of talk of it now. It's become more of an issue, I think, in the last 5-10 years about a growing epidemic of isolation in young men and boys. And we do see groups of young men and boys who are becoming isolated. They're becoming isolated very early. And that's going to have profound impacts on their health. So that's one of the reasons that I care about it. How I got into Manosphere research, I've always been interested in masculinity, but how I got into the Manosphere research was kind of almost out of curiosity. I was living in the United States when Donald Trump got elected for the first time. And I think, like a lot of people who were probably doing their PhDs in sociology at the time, I was surprised by the outcome of that election. Not just that he won, but the extent that he won. And at the same time, I was following kind of loosely many of these online communities of pro-Donald Trump supporters. So these young men who were very emphatic supporters of Donald Trump, very happy to see him win. We're predicting that he would win, by a large margin of error. And that's how I got into the Manosphere, is just the result of that election, realizing that these groups of men were much bigger than I had initially realized, and that they were having very tangible impact on all the societies that we live in. They're showing up to vote, for instance. They're looking for people that have social policies that punish migrants, people of color, and women, and they're supporting those people. And from that experience, that's how I got into the Manosphere.
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about a specific section within the Manosphere and a specific, call it ritual or beauty practice, and it's called looksmaxxing. Now, for people at home, what is looksmaxxing?
Looksmaxxing is a bit of a confusing one sometimes because there's communities for people who looksmax and might refer to themselves as looksmaxxers, but it's also a practice. It's just a thing a whole bunch of guys do, whether they're men who are not involved in the Manosphere that dramatically, or men who are in the white nationalist part of the Manosphere, or incels. So looksmaxxing in its simplest terms is just maximizing your physical appearance. So doing some behavioral change, some medical change, some surgical change to maximize how you look. And it can involve a whole slew of practices. So anything as minor as growing a beard. So the belief in many of these communities is that growing a beard can make someone look more masculine, make your jaw look more masculine, plucking your eyebrows, going on a diet, things that are fairly banal, like that. A scale up from that is a practice called mewing, which went viral a couple of years ago. And probably many people who are listening to this have heard about. See, this idea that placing the tip of your tongue and pressing it against the roof of your mouth over time is going to force your jaw to change and give you a more masculine looking jaw. And so that went viral in these communities and on TikTok and on YouTube. And many young men and boys were doing that. I heard reports from teachers that male students were not answering questions in class
Wow.
that they were skipping lunch or just drinking through a straw just so they could mew all the time. And again, this is like the idea that it's going to make their jaw look more square and masculine. Beyond that, there's men who Looksmaxx, they're taking drugs, hormone supplements. So things like testosterone is obviously the big one. Anabolic steroids is a big one, but other various hormones. And it can be almost every hormone you can think of. So relaxin, for instance, is one that I've seen men talk about using. And many men are buying these drugs and hormones in semi-legal or illegal markets. So like black market trade. They may or may not have any idea what's in the actual compound itself. So you think you're getting something like an anabolic steroid, but who knows what could be in that steroid you're injecting yourself with. And then a step up from that is surgical intervention. And many men are concerned about how their faces look. So they're getting rhinoplasties, they're getting brow ridge surgeries, changing how their orbital bones look. But the really big one for this community and many men right now is leg lengthening surgery. And there's the idea that if you are under 6 feet tall, you have basically no romantic prospects as a young man. So
which is not true based on my friends and who they date.
Yes. Yeah.
That is absolutely not the case.
I mean, it's absolutely not true. And you'll find that with a lot of this stuff, that a lot of the attitudes that they have are absolutely not true. The way that they think that women are judging men's bodies, I mean, it's not true. It's not true for many women.
Yeah.
But for them, it's a really heavily committed belief. So there's this idea, women, particularly on Tinder and other dating apps, are just filtering men out based on height. And so many women have a preference for 6 feet or taller. So if you are under 6 feet, you have no chance on those apps. So leg lengthening is a potential solution for you. And that can be a very expensive and very painful surgery. Basically, the bones in your shins are broken. Oof. They insert a metal rod and new bone grows. Yeah, it's very tough. New bone grows around the metal rod. Can be debilitating for months, and it will add several inches to height. So, 4 or 5 inches to height people might gain from doing that. And then the last thing that I'll mention is the thing that's going somewhat viral at the moment is something called bone smashing, which is as brutal as it sounds. It's the idea that you can cause micro injuries to your bones. So taking a hammer, for instance, and hitting it against your face, and that will damage the bones. And the bones are going to grow back more pronounced. And if you damage them in the right area, you can give yourself more masculine features. And so that's something that's quite popular at the moment, relatively speaking, for Looksmaxxing.
Can you walk me through that? Because you've mentioned a bunch of things and it all kind of sounds like pseudoscience. Like I don't know, is the idea that you smash your face a bit, and is it just the inflammation that means your face could be a bit bigger? Like, so much of it sounds like it's rooted in some science, but then it's also seems entirely implausible. So how are they getting this stuff?
That's a really great observation. And it's exactly how I'd summarize it as well. Is it sounds science-y, right? It's science-y, it's not science. And so there is the idea, like when you break a bone, it grows back different, it grows back stronger. And so they're extrapolating from ideas like that and thinking like, if I cause a bunch of microfractures, it will change how this bone displays. Thai kickboxers do something similar. They condition their shins. So they kick something again and again and again and again to cause microfractures in their shins, and it does make their shin bones stronger. They're extrapolating from that in terms of appearance. It sounds like science, and they talk about all this stuff in very scientific language. And the vast majority of it is not grounded in any medical science at all. The way that they do science is largely by performing experiments upon themselves. So the idea is that somebody got this idea that if I damage my bones in this strategic way, if I bone smash, it's going to give me the appearance that I look for. They try to do that. They then show their before and after pictures. Like, this is what I looked like before I bone smashed. This is what I look like after I bone smash. If other people see a desirable change in that, then they start trying to do it too. So it's just based on basically men treating themselves as petri dishes, experimenting on themselves, and other men thinking that's a good idea and then doing it. But they do appropriate a lot of scientific language, and they will refer to science in a pretty sloppy way for the most part to justify a lot of these changes.
And you've said many men and young men, etc., especially for the people at home. And I'm guilty of this myself, right? You're just like, these are just as a bunch of weird losers sitting at home doing crazy stuff to their faces. Like there's kind of this sometimes flippant, dehumanizing way we can discuss these subcultures. But I want to know, who is the looksmaxxing young man or kid? Who is that boy? And how does he, because I want to understand who he is, and perhaps that will help us understand how he actually got to be part of such a subculture.
I mean, if you want to know who's doing this, walk into the junior high school that's closest to you. And it's the young men and boys in that junior high and that high school. It's an extremely popular practice. Many of them are maybe not doing all these things, but they're doing some of them, or they know people who do, or they have the same views about their body as the men that I've been describing so far. So these are very typical, very average men, boys really, who are in grades 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. A little bit older, even the university students that I have here. And they all share this belief that they're being judged continuously based on their physical appearance. And the reason that they're looksmaxxing is because they want to increase their physical appearance because they know that how they look is so high stakes for them.
And do you think this is an offspring of growing up on the internet and it's been very crude? You know, I think about Instagram likes culture, right? We've all put a picture up on Instagram and it's been like, what? Like, where are all the likes? Is it part of like the Snapchatification of their childhoods? Or is it something that they're hearing from the world? Are they, I don't want to say unlucky in love because that's so reductive, because I think all teenagers are unlucky in love, boys and girls. It's like an unlucky, like notoriously unlucky time. What is the mechanism by which they're receiving the message, there's something wrong with how you look?
Yeah, I like that you say that everybody who's a teenager is an unlucky in love. And I think that that's a great message for us to give teenagers and young people, because they don't believe it should be that way. They think it's just them who's having the bad time with online dating. But you're exactly right. It's terrible to be dating when you're a teenager. And those first relationships can be terrible. Getting into that first relationship can be a struggle for everybody. Absolutely true. And it's something that I think a lot of them are not savvy to. The big thing is their exposure to social media. And this is what they even say themselves. So for them, there was a big change in society, like the moment that the iPhone released, and then the moment that online platforms grew in popularity. And the reason that they think this is because so much of our culture now is a visual culture, and you really are assessed on how you look all the time and very quickly. People get likes or they don't get likes on their photos. That makes us feel various things when that happens. And they are very aware of a very real form of discrimination, which we refer to as lookism. And lookism is again, like a very real bias. It's studied by sociologists and psychologists and other social scientists. And it is, we treat people who are physically attractive better than people who are physically unattractive. And that's true in many settings. It's true in educational settings. It's true in healthcare settings. It's true in employment settings.
Judicial settings. Judicial settings. There have been studies about how better looking men or women get shorter sentences. Yeah.
And so they're really savvy about that research. Earlier I was mentioning that they're not very dialed in on the biomedical research, and that's definitely true. They are very aware of this form of bias, and I think we all need to become more aware of it because social media has made it that much more salient than it used to be. The other thing is that many of them grow up in a climate of online dating, and online dating is much different from, people who met their partners before online dating. Online dating really is different. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's happening alongside that is that people are not meeting partners in kind of face-to-face interactions anymore. So I think the statistics are like less than 50% of young men have even asked someone out on a date in person. So they're not meeting people like in bars. They're not meeting people at university. So Tinder, Hinge, those types of things become the only real forum for their dating life. And on those platforms, people are really making decisions immediately based on appearance. And I'm sure we've all seen someone swipe through photos, and people are spending, like maybe a quarter of a second on some people, just flipping right past them, right? Dismissing them right away. So they're really aware that unless they stand out in like a quarter of a second in a 1 second kind of window, that they're going to be ignored. They're going to be relegated to being single. Well, how they feel anyway, is that they're relegated to being single forever. Yeah. And so looks become extremely important for them because you have to be attractive enough to make someone stop and think about you and swipe in the right direction.
Earlier on, you kind of mentioned how there are specific looksmaxxing communities who are speaking to each other, exchanging tips online. But kind of the principles and the beauty practices are things that now kind of exist in mainstream male culture and like the self-improvement of it all. According to Mintel, there is like an increase in facial skincare products men are purchasing. You're seeing an explosion in hair restoration surgery. The International Society of Hair Restoration Surgery said, well, they're incentivized to say this, but they said 95% of the men initiating hair restoration surgery are between the ages of 20 and 35, which is very young to contemplate that.
Stunningly young.
Yeah, it's stunningly young, right? And there's kind of like, I'm from the UK, so there's always these memes that go viral of men who've come back from Turkey and they're on the plane and you can tell they've had their hair transplant surgery. So it's interesting how looksmaxxing we're seeing it spread, right? And maybe a man doesn't know that I am, the reason I'm getting jaw filler is because of something that started off in Reddit forums. Are there any ways that we are seeing the spread of kind of the principles of self-improvement and it affecting men who don't necessarily even feel like they're part of this community?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is that the beauty industry has wanted to like crack the male market for decades and decades and decades. Like they would love it if men were buying beauty products to the extent that women are buying beauty products. That's, a white whale for them. And so a lot of this stuff is happening in marketing and advertising, is being pushed in popular culture. So looksmaxxing, like it is a community, is a practice for young men, but there are also a lot of men who, have no knowledge of these communities. They don't have like the behaviors that we're talking about. Maybe they don't see women in the ways that we're talking about, who are doing very similar things. We often talk about the men who participate in these communities. So like the men who are posting, the men who are saying the misogynistic things. That's not the only men who are getting impacted by it. The community that I study has like 10,000 people who participate in it regularly. It has millions of unique monthly visitors. So there's huge numbers of men who are consuming that content. They may not be participating, they may not be using misogynistic slurs or anything like that. But one of the things that's happening to those men is they're seeing guys who look like them being told that they're ugly, that they're hideous, that they need to end their lives, they need to get surgery. And that's, of course, going to impact even those guys who are not participating, who are just viewing the community. And there's a lot of guys who are doing that.
So it's like a huge ripple effect, basically.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and this may be a bit of a controversial question, right? Because I speak to some of my male friends and they would say, especially when Jordan Peterson was really big, they were like, the great thing about the Jordan Petersons is that they tell young men, you're a loser, get a job, lose some weight, go out and talk to someone. And they were like, I've seen it work for some friends, right? So if we look at the looksmaxxing community, it says to a guy, lose a bit of weight, dye your hair, working out, and let's say a man feels like the positive benefits of those things and his life does improve. Is there any part of these communities where we're seeing it? I don't know if it's looksmaxxing for good because it's kind of oxymoronic, but a side effect of this is that it actually pulls them away from that world and makes them feel more part of mainstream society.
I think that that's certainly possible. And there's communities out there where that happens. There's some weightlifting communities and bodybuilding communities where people don't really have fixed ideas about how your body should look. They're encouraging to each other. They're very positive. They can be uplifting spaces. I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong about wanting to improve yourself, being able to, run a few miles, being able to lift a certain amount of weight is very natural, I think. Makes sense in our society anyway, that people would want to improve their physical appearance. We're surrounded by people who will only tell us nice things about ourselves in many ways, right? My wife is only going to give me compliments. She's never going to give me like the kind of the straight feedback that maybe I want about my appearance. But people online will give you that advice or that insight that maybe you can't get somewhere else. So there's a slither of truth in there, but I would say it's just a slither. And the reason is because you look at these communities and it steers into compulsive behaviors extremely quickly. and it absolutely eviscerates people's body image and self-esteem.
Mm.
So, if it was just people trying to feel their best or live their best life, or, moving into something about body positivity, maybe with some life change, I don't think any of that stuff would be really problematic. Instead, what you see in these communities are men breaking down each other's bodies in this really intimate, precise way, and making these radical generalizations about how their bodies look and what the consequences will be. So, the ratio of your upper lip to your chin, for instance, can be something that dictates your dating life, how close your eyes are together, whether they tilt up or where they tilt down, how pronounced your brow ridge is.
Kind of
All
eugenics-y as well. It's got a lot of...
Yeah, it will sound very eugenics-y. Wrist circumference was a big one.
And Mike,
but
sorry to interrupt. Can you
Yep.
explain like the PSL scale? Because I think that's what you're talking about, this whole language of how they're deconstructing their faces. Because, can you get into that?
Yeah. So the PSL scale is, it has its roots in these older Manosphere communities, communities for pickup artists. They're kind of like proto-incel, proto-Manosphere communities, early versions of these communities. They developed what many users of the Manosphere users think are the objective criteria for evaluating someone's attractiveness. And there's not a lot in it, to tell you the truth. It sounds way more sciencey and substantive than it actually is. But really what it is just a breakdown of how someone looks from 0 to 10. The idea is that what they assert really is that most people are average. So most people should be around 5s. So their ratings of people tend to be more punitive and lower than you would expect in a lot of communities. So men will post their pictures, and young men, young boys are posting their pictures in these communities all the time, and they will be rated by other men on this 10-point scale. And even for slight deviations, like things that I personally would not notice, I think many people would not notice, they will get very punitive evaluations. So the idea is you can be looking at a picture of a guy that you might think is like reasonably quite attractive, certainly above average, and they're getting scores of like 4 or 3. And they're being told that their life is over. They're going to have an unhappy life unless they bump that score up, unless they looksmax to increase their score. And the justification for their low score is these really intimate breakdowns of how their bodies look. So it's not the type of thing, like, for instance, that your friends were mentioning, where it's like, okay, do some planks in the morning, take better care of yourself, and, comb your hair once a day. You'll be fine, do that stuff. It's not that type of thing. It's things that are on your body, very nuanced, that can really only be corrected with surgical cosmetic intervention. So they're changing the way that men are looking at their own bodies. They're looking at their bodies in these, these ratios, these very fine, nuanced flaws, and they're picking apart each other's appearance in like a way that you don't see outside of communities like, say, anorexia or body dysmorphic communities, where people are really picking up on nuances that many of us miss, and they're extremely punitive about them.
To the body dysmorphia of it all, because that's where people will land. What's interesting to me about this is that these communities are very homosocial, because they're primarily just men, and I think cis straight males judging other cis straight males, but in the pursuit of women. But they don't have it's so circular to me, because then there is not the input of women, because I think most women would be like, well, no, I don't care about that. Or I'm not even attuned. We're not attuned to that in the ways that you think we are, in the same ways that in, eating disorder communities, they'll be like, oh, this is how I want the collarbone to look, and this is how I want my hip to look. And most people who aren't in those communities will be like, well, no, that's not how I feel an attractive body is. And also, I don't notice that. Yes.
So, I mean, it is really a different gaze. So you're looking at people with different eyes in these communities, and they're showing people flaws that they're inventing flaws, I would say, that they wouldn't notice otherwise. I will say that there are also gay men in these communities who are participating in Looksmaxxing, and they're accepted in the community for the most part. Even though there is homophobia in the communities, gay men do participate.
And are these gay men who are having problems, are incels?
They're usually men. So incels are men who have had no sexual romantic experience, people in looksmaxxing communities, many of them have had sexual relationships. So there's a big component of people, young men and boys who haven't had sex yet. They want to look as attractive as possible. There's other groups of men who have had sex with men or women, and they still want to maximize their appearance because they want to have more sexual partners. They want to have more desirable sexual partners, and because they think that they're judged based on their looks. So even though they are the lucky ones as far as incels would see, they want to reap even higher benefits from physical appearance. So someone who might think that they're an 8 out of 10 and has had sexual romantic relationships with people might come to looksmaxxing because they want to be a 9, a 9.5. They want to get bigger, faster, stronger in every way that they can. One of the things that is a consequence of not having women in there is that they believe that women are harsher judges of appearance than men are. So they do say the most brutal thing about other men. Like, someone's got a nose that's slightly big and they refer to them as like an ogre, tell them to go live in a cave. No one will ever love you. Give up on life. But they also tell men that women are judging them even more harshly than the men in the community do. The only difference is that the men in the community are giving you real talk. So a woman will lie about your appearance. She'll say that you look fine, you look average, you're attractive, but she's lying to you. The men in this community are giving you the truth, and it's a brutal truth, but they're the only people who are giving you the truth. So that PSL rating, that objective measure of your attractiveness, this is like the only place you can get it. This is the only community where you can trust people to give you an honest assessment of your appearance and then give you advice for how to correct that appearance.
It sounds so culty, or like, like a high control religion where, we know the truth. Only we can tell you the truth, and the people out there are lying to you and do these things in order to protect yourself from the people out there. And I think what is kind of worrying all of this is like the enemy in this is women, not necessarily the patriarchy, which I always say is like the patriarchy harms women and men. And the fact that your physical appearance is paramount is a thing that women have to contend with all the time. And women actually don't enjoy having to contend with. But by making women kind of the boogeyman in all of this, it seems like they're drawing the most toxic conclusions and the most punishing just for themselves. Because to me, that's a miserable way to live. Like, when I don't feel happy about my appearance, it's not a good feeling, especially when it's like, it's not nice to walk around not feeling good about yourself or feeling like the world is constantly judging you. So it just feels like a prison of their own making, or they're reinforcing that prison. Because I'm not saying that some of what they're experiencing is not reality. It definitely is reality.
Yes.
But it seems that they're choosing to reinforce that or be in the darkest and the hardest places of that reality.
Yeah. And I think that the thing you meant, like, that there is some reality to what they're saying. And I think we all need to be cognizant of that, is that we do judge people based on their appearance, and the complaints that these communities are making, many of them are grounded in reality. It's where they take those complaints, the level of intensity that they have for them, that's different. It can be cult-like, as you suggested, in many ways. We'd say confirmation bias in the social sciences, for instance. The main thing is that they're only looking for evidence that supports their worldview, and they only include people in the community that support their worldview. So something like the incel community, they kick out men who've had sex with women. They kick out women. They only want people who echo the things of the echo chamber. And same thing with these other Manosphere communities, including Looksmaxxing. People who deviate from the expectations of the community are ignored, or they're formally kicked out of the community. And they can be right about a whole bunch of things. They can say many of the things that you said today. Like, you can find a million examples of women with men who are average or unattractive, and they're happy in those relationships. Women who care about things beyond physical appearance. Women who are judged based on their physical appearance. And they delete and avoid all of that information because they only want to hone in on the issue that they care about and the issue that they feel is most determining to their life, which is women are judging them based on their physical appearance. Everything else gets deleted.
But you kind of draw a distinction between people who have been red-pilled and people who've been black-pilled. And I love if you can talk us through that, because I think that's a really important way of understanding, the young boys from junior high up until you're late 20s, I would say. They're not young boys, but grown men who are looksmaxxing in various ways.
Yeah. So looksmaxxing, I think, has an important and maybe underappreciated role in the manosphere and in these various communities. There are lots of men. So first off, I will say looksmaxxing communities can be extremely misogynistic, and they can talk about women in very essentialist ways and just make women sound like animals, basically. Like women are only interested in the most physically attractive men.
Which is crazy. I wish they'd make us materialistic. I'm like, what about the women that just want men from, I'm like, make a lot of money, you can probably get a girlfriend.
They talk about that, and their argument is that any woman who, like, women might be married to a man with like a high social status and lots of resources, but they will have sex with men who are physically attractive. So it doesn't matter how rich you are, because your partner is always looking for that man who's more physically desirable than you are. And it's this idea in these communities, and this is part of the black pill in some ways, idea in these communities that women are constantly on the look for the most physically attractive partner they can possibly have sex with, and they will always take that opportunity when it's presented to them.
It feels like projection, right? Because this is actually what their concern is. They're like, no one's having sex with me. So that I think they've applied the matrix by which they explore the world, not to, pun unintended, and they've given that to a lot of women because, I don't know, I'm not as young as I used to be, but I think for a lot of young women and girls out there, I think women's standards are really low, and they just want someone that's going to be nice to them and someone to be a boyfriend. It was just never a thing of like, it needs to be the most gorgeous, beautiful man in the world. I don't even think women gold dig enough, if I'm honest with you. So like this impression seems so shaped by their inner desires of wanting like to conquer and conquest and have sex, right?
I absolutely think that that's part of it. And it reminds me of how we talked about men in the 80s and 90s, that men were only interested in women physically, and like any other trait about women, they didn't even care. It was just looks. That was all it. And it's become inverse now. And now it's like women are only interested. I've never had a conversation with a woman about her romantic life where the only thing that mattered was a guy's physical appearance. And that's like sex, dating, marriage, whatever. Like I've never heard that ever. They believe that, and part of it is, I think you're absolutely right, that they're projecting how they see relationships onto women. The other part is that, again, with their dalliances with science, is that they will comb through research and find things that back up that opinion. You know, things in evolutionary psychology, for instance, an article here or there that feeds into their confirmation bias that this is all that women are about, and they'll hold that up as like scientific proof that that's how things really are. So that's definitely part of it. But going back to the relationship between them and the manosphere, so I do want to say, like, I would call it a manosphere community in many ways, the looksmaxxing community, but not all men who looksmax are into the manosphere and into those manosphere politics. So it's a little ambiguous. It's kind of like a trading zone almost. In many ways, it's like a gateway to the larger manosphere.
Right.
So many men in the manosphere share this idea about lookism, these ideas about lookism, that we judge people unfairly based on their looks, and then zone in specifically on women. So it's women who are judging men unfairly based on their looks. And you'll see that in like white supremacist communities. You'll see that in manosphere communities for Asian men and black men. You'll see it in the incel community. So there's a lot of overlap in that regard. And some people end up getting into the manosphere through looksmaxxing. So they just want to look their best, because many of us do, right? It's pretty natural.
Universal.
Like,
Universal.
Yeah. And so many of these communities, you mentioned the red pill and the black pill. The red pill is the idea that there's like a social war against men and boys, that feminists and progressives, people like myself, are systematically undermining men and boys, that society is set up in a way to disfavor men and boys. And you need to become aware of that harsh reality that society is against men and boys and fight back against it. And that's the basis of a lot of manosphere communities, like men rights communities, and people like Andrew Tate, who's falling off in influence, but this would be, part of his logic. The black pill is kind of an extension of the red pill. And it's the idea in the incel community that women's biological preferences for attractive men are fixed. They're hardwired. So there's nothing you can do to change women's romantic preferences. And if you were a guy who's like 7 out of 10 or lower, so you're like a high average to low average, you have absolutely no shot of a meaningful romantic or sexual relationship with a woman. And so the most practical thing to do in response to that is to give up and to accept fatalistically that you're going to be alone forever. And then that's accepting your involuntary celibate incel status.
So this is probably like the most
men,
extreme, like pessimistic conclusion, right? That like,
yes,
the hopeless, I can't improve myself. So lookism is not going to appeal to that person, right? Because they've just assigned to their fate, kind of.
Yeah, so it does actually in some ways. So they certainly believe that they are judged in a lookist society. So the reason that they can't get a girlfriend, for instance, is because they're like 5 out of 10 of attractiveness. So like a perfectly average guy, but perfectly average isn't good enough anymore. So they certainly believe that they're judged on lookist criteria. They also believe, and many of these men, they used to Looksmaxx, or they used to go to pickup artist communities, and those communities failed for them. So, they tried mewing, they tried bone smashing, they still didn't get a girlfriend. So they ended up in the incel community. Now that they're in the incel community, the belief is that no matter how much you change, how you could take steroids, you could get leg lengthening, but if you were like unattractive enough to begin with, it will not be a big enough impact to make you noticeable to women. So one of the things, for instance, that they talk about is that if you can get leg lengthening surgery and you would still be under 6 feet tall, then it's over for you. Leg lengthening surgery doesn't help. There's no benefit of being taller. You're just harming your body and you're better off giving up. So they buy into lookism, but they almost see lookism as this completely deterministic, fatalistic way of looking at the world, and that there's nothing they can do, for incels anyway, there's nothing that they can do that will make them desirable.
Mike, help me out here. And this is where I like struggle with it all. Why aren't they like, why didn't I improve my personality? Because like leg lengthening, it sounds like some extreme shit. Do you know what I mean?
It is, yeah.
It's like the leg lengthening, extremely painful, extremely expensive. I think most of the surgeons are like in India, so you have to travel really far to do it. Seems to me it'd be like much easier to be like, oh, why don't I just be a nicer guy? Like, why isn't that the conclusion?
Yeah. I mean, my wife's a clinical psychologist, and she'd probably say, personality change can actually be pretty hard for some people. But I think it is true. It's why would you not change your personality rather than doing all this stuff to your body, particularly when they don't get a lot of benefit from it either, right? Like they're constantly viewing themselves in a negative way, in a negative light. One of the reason is if they start saying it's about personality, then it becomes their fault. So a lot of their narrative is women doing this, progressives doing that, feminists doing this. So as long as it can be how other people are judging you based on your body, it feels like it's about other people for them. If it's your personality, your behaviors, then you have to take accountability for yourself and what you're doing. And a lot of them want to avoid that. They want to blame other people, not what they're doing. And if you go into these communities and you watch them talk about women, you will see immediately for many of them. So I'm definitely going to say some people are judged very harshly by their appearance. They have an uphill battle. Absolutely, that's true. Other people, you go into these communities and you see how they talk about women, and it becomes apparent readily that a big part of it is their personality. The other part of it, and this is, I think, when I talk about personality, this is the thing that I really fixate on personally, is one of the things that's important to their personality is men dominating women. And what they don't want to give up is male supremacy. So they want to be guys in a world where the attractive guy gets to do whatever he wants and the alpha male gets to do whatever he wants. And women throw themselves at you and they act in an animalistic way. What they don't want to do is they don't want to steer towards feminism. They don't want to steer towards women's issues, anything that women care about or are concerned about, because that involves them giving up on the potential benefits that they're going to get from patriarchy and sexism. So they're complaining by and large about being losers in the game, but they don't want to change the game. They just want to be winners in that game. And for them to be winners in that game, they still want gender inequality. They still want women to be subordinate to them. They still want women to take orders from them. They still want women to be sex objects for them. And so they don't want to change those parts of the personality that women might find very off-putting, their sexist attitudes and beliefs, because they do actually want to participate in sexism, many of them.
And that's so alarming to me, because I think that links to the wider issue of how the violent ways this shows up in terms of rape culture.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing where it comes down to, the personality change, like the changes that they're not willing to make or they find difficult to make because they have these commitments to sexism is, understanding women as human beings, as agents, and not just reducing them to sex objects. And when you see them as human beings and agents, it forces you to change how you see them, but also how you see your relations with them. And for many of these guys, I think that that's an uncomfortable process, because it will make them have to, in many ways, take a real red pill and wake up to the fact that they've been bigoted, reductive, violent, aggressive, and misogynistic to people for vast swaths of their life.
That's really interesting. I guess for me, I think a mother raising a young boy and, got cousins who are in their teen years and early 20s. I'm sure there's a bunch of listeners at home listening who are mothers too. What can be done about this? And I mean, on a formal institutional level, whether that's schools or churches or the government, and then on an individual familial level, because these ideas are kind of in the ether. I think what you said earlier about is when I asked you who is the Looksmaxxer, and you were like, well, it's just walk into your local junior high. It's a boy in there.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the original sin has been done. This idea, this virus is out there. I'm curious about what we can do. What should we be doing? Because it's only going to get worse, right? If we don't do something.
Yeah, I think the main thing is we need to get really serious about body positivity amongst men and boys. I think where we've missed or what we've ignored is that these are now also issues for young men and boys. And I think we took for granted that these things weren't impacting them, and they certainly unquestionably are. And I expect that this is going to become a more troublesome, more pronounced issue over time. I don't think it's going to become minimized. I don't think it's going to recede. So I think one of the main things that we can do is talk to the men and the boys in our lives, talk to them about body positivity, talk to them about how they look, have conversations, frank conversations about it. I often mention this while I'm teaching, and I bring up Looksmaxxing when I teach. Many of my students are young women. They deal with themselves. They deal with these issues of body image and self-esteem. And when I first introduced the topic of Looksmaxxing, many of them in the audience will laugh. They think it's funny that men would be concerned with their image or upset about how they look or this, that, or the other thing. And I think one of the things that we can stress is that it's not funny. It's can be quite serious, and it's something that we have to focus on and take seriously. I think on the broader social level, we're getting into the situation where we have to really think about what the consequences of social media have been for young people in our society. So yeah, many countries, I know the UK is talking about this. Yeah. Australia has already done it, a ban on people who are under 16. As I raise my daughter, I certainly will not be allowing social media while she's young. I can't imagine doing the research that I do and thinking that that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And I think we need to put more pressure on the platforms. So Google, Meta, Microsoft, all of them. We need to put pressure on all these big tech companies to really think about what their algorithms do, what their algorithms make available to people. They have made some improvements over the last couple of years. If you search for certain Looksmaxxing or body dysphoria terms, you will get referred to a helpline instead of
I noticed that when I searched some stuff on TikTok doing research for this episode. It was if you need help, call.
Yeah, very frustrating as a researcher studying this stuff to not be able to document the content. But I think that's a great first step that they're doing things like that. But I think they can go much farther than they have. Yeah. And I think it's part of our duty as citizens, parents, people who have young men and boys in our lives, to pressure them to do those sorts of things.
So I know you're a sociologist, so much of your work is about the contemporary and the now and figuring out the moment. But if there is a futurist in you, I really want to know, what do you think happens to Looksmaxxing? Do you think it continues to become mainstream? Does it recede? Does it morph into something else? And I think that in light of especially where we are today in 2026, in a very fraught political moment, like what happens to looksmaxxing over the coming years?
I would bet that and I'm not much of a gambler, but I gamble on this. I would bet that it's going to become much more of a pronounced issue, much more. So we might not refer to it as looksmaxxing. We might refer to it as different practices that happen to go viral at various periods of time. Like it's mewing now, it's bone smashing 2 years from now. But I think it's going to continue to be a real serious issue and more of an issue because the things that cause it really haven't changed at all. We've done nothing to change them. This community is a tricky community to study and to talk about because on one hand, they do a lot of things that are offensive to a lot of other people. But this is the flip side. And the flip side is that they are in this culture, this society where we do treat people very poorly based on how they look. That is a terrible experience to have. It's a terrible experience to become aware of. And it is very degrading for the self. So, it certainly is, there's real problems and real issues here. I don't think that they deal with them in the right way, but I think that they're talking about real problems and real issues. So I think that's one big thing. The social media that we consume is just so visually based. People are judging and consuming faces. Those faces have been face-tuned. Many people have had plastic surgeries. We're watching movies where men's bodies have become ludicrous over the last 15 or 20 years.
Absolutely. I
don't want to name any particular actor.
There's a particular franchise where all the men are like ripped.
Yes.
We won't name them.
Maybe they have capes and superpowers, but and the guys doing that, actually the one person that I will mention would be Dwayne Johnson, The Rock. Mm-hmm. And he was a football player, he was a wrestler, and he was an actor. And if you look at his body across those three professions, the one where he got absolutely the most cut, the leanest, the biggest was not those first two where his body literally was the thing that he used to do his job. It was acting. His body as an actor is so profoundly different than when he first went into wrestling. And you see like that those are the bodies that young men are exposed to. And the thing that I'm particularly worried about over the next 5 or 10 years, you mentioned young men who are like 20 getting hair surgeries, for instance, is that the group of young men who are doing this from like 18 to like 25 or like 14 to 25, that there's going to be some really severe knock-on consequences of the interventions that they did on their bodies when they were young and the consequences that they have to deal with later in life. So I think we're going to see it there as well.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that, which we haven't talked about a lot, but a lot of these men who are doing these interventions, they're still young and they're still growing. Like they're taking human growth hormone when they're 14. They're taking steroids when they're 14. They're putting black market chemicals into hormones into their bodies when they're still growing. They're still gaining height. There's going to be a lot of consequences for those men as well. And I think we're going to be dealing with both looksmaxxing and its ramifications for years to come.
It's interesting when I hear you say that, it kind of reminds me of in the 70s and in the 80s when transgender people had to be underground and, it was gender affirming care for themselves, but it was black market doctors. Yeah. It was, kind of like black market physicians, not real physicians. You're just going to somebody's house and they're giving you butt shots or lip injections, et cetera, et cetera. And there are so many parallels between these cis men, whether straight or gay, who want to have a certain vision of manhood, of masculinity, of their gender, like visual vision of that, and the way they're aspiring to it, but they're using very dangerous ways. And some of the ways are mainstream. And the fact that they're fine-tuning their body so young and often, as you said, ordering drugs from China or wherever it is in the world that they don't know what they has in it. I just think we also probably have a public health crisis on our hand, maybe 10 to 15 years from now, for a very small subset of the population.
Yeah, I think that's certainly true. And I think the other way that it's going to be an emerging health crisis is in terms of the mental health consequences of participating in these communities. So, there's the physical interventions that men are doing on their bodies, but there's like the psychological weight of being viewed and talking about yourself in a very degrading fashion. Seeing that you're not worthy of love, you'll never get affection, that if you're in a job interview, all the person is thinking about is how you look. If you're in a university class, all that professor is thinking about is your appearance, that you're being treated unfairly based on how you look all the time, and walking around and feeling terrible about yourself. And then unfortunately, and this goes back to that argument of like, can there be some good in these communities? Another thing that I point to saying that I don't think that that's the case is they often encourage people to complete suicide based on their inability to look smack successfully. So we have many instances of people being told, you will never get that ideal body on that PSL scale. You'll never be a 9 or a 10. You're always going to be ignored. And so in this community, often what they say is they tell someone to rope, and that's like a euphemism for suicide by hanging. And so they're telling 14-year-old, 15-year-old boys who think that they're only going to end up being 5'10", that they should complete suicide now while they're at it and just not waste their life being ugly and being ignored. And so I think that that's going to be a big driver for poor mental health amongst men. Men are already, reluctant to talk about their mental health. They often talk about their mental health far too late in the game. We need to be better about them talking about their mental health, which I think every country on the planet has come to realize. And this is going to be a driver in decreasing men's mental health. And I think it's extremely serious issue, and certainly one that I think is going to become worse, unfortunately, over time.
Mike, I've learned so much today. I appreciate you making the time, and you've given me so much to think about. I could literally speak to you all day. For our audience at home, where's the best place they can find you?
Probably just on my own website. So that's Michael Allen Halpin, Allen with 2Ls.com. And all my papers are up there. This paper that we've been talking about is open access.
I love it. Democratizing the knowledge. I love that.
I know. It's great. It's great. Yes. So a big thank you to the government of Canada that helps me pay to keep that research open access. So shout out for Shirk. And so all those papers are there, and people are welcome to read my research on Looksmaxxing, my research on the Manosphere and incels. And
we'll definitely link the Looksmaxxing research in the show notes, so everyone can.
Oh, great! Yeah,
everyone can just click through. Mike, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.